All right, welcome back. I hope you've been studying all the five ceremonies for the framework we've been teaching. On the last video, we talked about the five frameworks. We did go through and do a recap on every ceremony. We also made an emphasis and a point to talk about the daily scrum within those ceremonies. So today we're going to talk about number two. We're going to talk about planning out of that framework. So just a quick recap, and if you remember properly, the framework is agile based. Agile is just a development methodology that you can use to develop software. It's an agile framework and it's a method for developing software. We said that it was a faster pace of development, hence the word agile, so it's faster development. You can say dev for short, dev or development, faster development. We also talked about the word agile having another origin, and that was Scrum. Scrum is a concept within the agile methodology of software development that allows you to develop software faster based on self-forming teams. Self-forming teams. So quick recap there. You got your framework, the Agile Scrum framework. We talked about this number and what it means. That's going to be your starting or at least your average starting positions in terms of how much you'll make from an IT PM standpoint. Scrum Master, which is another position in tech that's equivalent to a project manager. You might be a specialist, so forth and so on. You got your numbers broken down. That's what 150K means based on the framework. The Agile method, it's a software development methodology. And then the word Agile means faster development. You have Scrum, self-forming teams. I'll give you a minute to take that in. All right, let's continue. So we're going to clean this up. So based on the framework, there's five ceremonies. You should be able to name the first five ceremonies because we've talked about them. That was the initial conversation that we had. We talked about the daily scrum last week, or the last video, I should say. Today we're going to talk about planning. Can you name three, four, and five? Tell me three, four, and five. Put it in your chat. Three, four, and five. Matter of fact, whoever responds with three, four, and five, I'm gonna respond back to you with a DM, and I have something free for you pertaining to this certification. So we're going to talk about planning today. If you remember, the daily scrum itself, the daily scrum had many pieces and many components. Again, this is the first ceremony out of five. Daily scrum. What happens in the daily scrum? Remind me. If I remember correctly, there's three questions that are asked every single daily scrum meeting. All right. What are some other components of the daily scrum? Okay. The three questions that are asked are: what did you do yesterday? What did you do today? And the most important one is what? Do you have any impediments? For sure. And the reason why number three is the most important is because this is the question that helps whoever the manager or whoever the scrum master, your IT project manager, it helps them to understand what issues are being held at the time. So this is about issues. What's holding the team back from completing their work? That's what this is about. It's all about issues. That's what an impediment is. It's a problem. And the job of the Scrum Master or the ITPM is to resolve that. It's all about resolution. If we're able to resolve any impediments, it allows us to flow smoother and smoothly to developing software, keeping the process going because it is faster, it's increments, it's intervals. And the last thing that we talked about concerning daily Scrum, we talked about a time box. That time box was 2 to 4 weeks. And if you remember from our last conversation, that 2 to 4 weeks was considered to be an increment. Within that 2 to 4 week time box or that increment, that's how we're developing software in terms of the time frame. You have 2 weeks to put out as much new code as possible, or between 2 to 4 weeks. It could be 3, it could be 4. Every team is different. It depends on what team you're on. So that's the daily Scrum. Let's get into number two. Number two ceremony, planning. So planning is a different beast. And here's the reason why planning is different. Planning is it's a little more laid back, a little more chill, and it goes into details because your planning is a ceremony where you figure out everything that has to be done in that 2 to 4 week time frame. Now, this is something that we've never talked about, and I've never discussed some of the other details of the framework. So I'm going to very high level introduce them to you today, and then from video to video to video, I'll give you more pieces. But in order to have a planning, you must understand the framework a little bit deeper. There's an actual flow for the planning, and if you look at some of my other videos, I have given pictures. But here's the flow for planning. So from a planning standpoint, it kind of looks like this. You have your daily Scrum here. Daily Scrum, that's what it means. Matter of fact, we make it a little bit cleaner. Let's start over. Let's get this thing together. All right. Boom. And we're just going to do it this way. You have your daily Scrum. This is high level. And then you have your planning. In order to go to the planning phase, you have to have something called user stories or requirements. These user stories are in something that's called the backlog. Again, this is very high level. I just want to introduce this to you so you understand the concept and you're able to flow a little bit more when you're thinking about planning. So, from a planning standpoint, as a team, there's a repository. This is a repository or a backlog, which is a place where stuff is stored, information is stored. It's normally pre vetted information already put in place and prioritized. So, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, already ready to go. And as a team in planning, we simply pull whatever we believe we can get done in that 2 to 4 week time frame into a planning session. So you have a repository information that's already vetted, already prioritized. This information, they're called user stories. And in the planning session, you have unlimited amount of time, in my opinion, to continuously grab information from this user story backlog into your planning. In your planning sessions, you want to figure out what work needs to be done in your sprints. That's all this is about. You're going to figure out what work can I pull from this backlog into my planning session to see what can be done in a sprint. That's a new word, sprint. The word sprint is synonymous with 2 to 4 weeks. If you hear the word sprint, the first thing I thought about was a sprinter running around the track. That's exactly what we're doing because this is faster development. So you have 2 to 4 weeks for a sprint. At that pace, you know you're going to have a daily scrum every single day within those 2 to 4 weeks. You're going to have a planning within those 2 to 4 weeks normally once within that 2 to 4 week time frame when you're trying to figure out what work needs to be pulled in. That's one thing that's done in planning. The second thing that's done is you figure out how long it's going to take for the work to be done. You figure out the LOE. This is a technical term used for determining time boxes. And that acronym is level of effort. There's a whole process to this, and we'll talk about it in other videos. And my handwriting is horrible today. But you need to figure out the level of effort. So we figure out what's needed in the actual sprint, what work needs to be done. We also figure out the level of effort. Those are the two main pieces and components that we talk about in planning. I think one of the third points that makes a lot of sense to me, that's always needed in a planning session, is just understanding of the work that's needed to be completed. So this is essentially planning, and this is what it consists of. Planning is based on the 5 ceremonies that you have in your Agile Scrum framework, 150K framework. In a planning session, you figure out what's needed to be done. You also figure out the level of effort, meaning how long will it take my team to complete this work? And then just understanding of the stories. I mentioned the word user stories. User stories, they're requirements, they're software specifications. It's the information that's needed to build a system. They're called user stories, though, whenever you're working from an agile methodology. But those are user stories. In planning, we pull user stories that are already prioritized 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however they may do it. We pull those down into the planning meeting or planning session, and we simply continuously talk about them. It lasts about 2 hours sometimes, but we figure out what needs to be done. We figure out the level of effort as well as understanding. That's planning in a nutshell. Now, there's a whole lot more planning, and I'll have a part two, I think. And I'm going to have a part two because I want to truly break down this framework picture versus you just seeing the 5 methodologies. I'm going to break down the framework so you understand where each ceremony fits into the actual framework itself. So, just another recap, I'm going to bring in everything that we've talked about thus far. So, we've talked about our framework, which we all know it to be the 150K framework. This framework is based on Agile Scrum principles or the Agile methodology. We'll put method for short. Within the Agile Scrum methodology, the framework has 5 ceremonies. There's 5 ceremonies. The 5 ceremonies, which we've talked about, the first one, the daily Scrum. We just talked about planning, and we're going to go over planning again because there is a part two. Number 3 is your review or your demo. Number 4 You have your retro. And number 5, you have your PBR. You should know what PBR is by now. We've talked about it multiple times. What's PBR? Put it in the chat. It's product backlog refinement. Product backlog refinement. We're going to talk about them all. I got to get y'all to the promised land. You have to understand these basics first before you move into any IT role. I'm actually teaching you in reverse, and here's the reason why. I'm teaching you IT managerial concepts and skills because they also include a lot of the basics, the basic pieces within this framework. We'll backtrack, and then we're going to talk about things like coding. We're going to talk about business systems analyst, which is a role that allows you to work on the business and the technical side of things. But this is your 150K framework, synonymous with your salaries, at least average starting salaries. Those salaries are for what? IT, PMs, Scrum Masters. They manage the projects. Now, what I'll tell you lastly, as it pertains to planning, once planning is complete, you then go into your 2 to 4 week time box, and your teams are once again working, which brings me back to number 1, your daily scrum. You have that daily scrum every day. Planning would only happen maybe once or twice within a 2 to 4 week time frame. That's it. You only need one big planning session to pull items from that backlog. Now, the information that I'm teaching you here and that I'm starting with is very important, as I stated. If you're seeking any type of technical certification, you don't know where to walk in and start at, this is a good starting point. So the certification that I'm teaching this framework from, and it's a part of our book too. I'll show the book in our next video, but it's the CSM. That stands for Certified Scrum Master. Now, this certification can be studied for and taken and passed in 2 days based on how Coles Consulting teaches this. With the books that we have that we've created, they're specifically for the Scrum Alliance Scrum Master certifications. And we use Scrum Alliance as our base because most government and financial sectors require that governing body certifications. It's called the Scrum Alliance. Go check it out. The prices do vary, but we do have a boot camp, as I stated, 2 days. We'll teach you, we'll give you everything you need. We'll even provide you with our manual that's directly from the Scrum Alliance's certifications and teachings. I even used it myself when I passed mine about, I think, 9 years ago now. But we'll give you the same information. And based on that boot camp, after those 2 days, we'll sign you up directly with the Scrum Alliance's teams, and you'll go through their training, which is normally 1, maybe 2 days as well, boot camp style, just to give you that refresher. Coles Consulting's course, Scrum Alliance directly, that's included in the boot camp, and you should get your certification guaranteed if you do everything that we teach you in 2 days. That's possible, and that's when you'll start seeing that 150K framework making more sense. That's when you'll see the results. And at that point, you're really ready to move into other sectors of IT just by knowing that. For an example, cyber. AWS is a big one. Oh man, this is a money one right here. If you understand anything concerning Amazon Web Service, you're golden. I promise you. And I can teach this as well if recommended, if needed, if requested. Cyber, AWS, artificial intelligence, of course, machine learning, finance. It's a huge one. That's also called fintech. Most people don't think it, but healthcare. Healthcare has a big tech proponent. Pharmacy is at the top of the list. The reason why pharmacy is at the top of the list, because pharmacy is now switching over to a sector of IT called informatics. Informatics is a combination of physical implementation of making sure that customers have all the meds they need, but more efficiently, so that there's no issues of contraindications, which means knowing the customer's history whenever you give them a prescription, it's prescribed to them, knowing that it won't mess up their body flow, et cetera, et cetera. But these are some of the sectors that you can dive into once you learn this framework. Like it's